Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's video lecture. As usual, here's our list of learning objectives, so let's just dive right in. First up is a short intro piece by Chris Browning, who provides a brief historiographical overview of perpetrator studies. So in the wake of World War II, there developed what we can call the monster trope, a stereotypical image of a particular type of perpetrator personality. Social psychologists have critiqued this trope as an example of a fundamental attribution error, or the oversimplified idea that such behaviors are caused by dispositional rather than situational factors. In the 1960s, there was a swing in the opposite direction, towards structural accounts, with the image of the hapless bureaucrat, or the Willy Loman stereotype of the Nazis. Yet since the 1990s, with the turn towards micro-level motivations, including the role of ideology and agency alongside structure, scholars have tended to favor multivariable accounts. This is evident in reading 2, which stresses that there is no grand theory for explaining what makes perpetrators tick. Instead, the authors review a number of different variables. We've come across some of these before, such as scapegoats, and we'll see some of them again, as with the role of difficult life conditions. A key takeaway here is that there's no dichotomy between the dispositionalist accounts, like Goldhagen, and the situationalist accounts, like Browning. Much like the structure-agency debate, we have to see both sides of the same coin. The authors also end on a meditative note, asking whether to explain is to condone. What are the moral implications of these social psychological explanations? Next we have a piece by Dan Stone, who proceeds from an important implication left by Goldhagen, which is that the social pressures argument made by Browning et al. Can't account for the excessive brutalism of the perpetrators. Not all of them were hapless bureaucrats like the ones depicted by Hannah Arendt or Stanley Milgram, nor were they monsters. Rather, he argues that the perpetrators create so-called ecstatic communities, where they form a heightened sense of belonging to their own in-group that effectively legitimizes their behavior. Our next reading comes from a volume on subaltern genocides, whereby ostensibly oppressed groups, whether real or imagined, seek to gain revenge and liberation by waging genocide against their oppressors, again, whether real or imagined. The fluidity of roles here is theoretically important, as we'll see later in the presentation. We've already introduced the theme of social constructionism, i.e., about how the perpetrator's sense of reality can be intersubjectively imagined. The author argues that a key sentimentality that creates this intersubjectively imagined worldview of the perpetrators is humiliation, or what she calls the nuclear bomb of emotions, as it can transform quote-unquote rational self-interest into extremism. This is an extra slide from a supplementary reading by Eliza van Joden-Forgy, who we read in week 1. She notes that most perpetrators are alienated men who want to overthrow existing power structures and radically reorganize society in their own image. She sheds important insight into the role of anxieties and humiliation, as well as the role inversion that we'll see in the next slide. Our last reading is by Mark Levine, who revisits an earlier debate we had about the nature of the genos. He falls on the etic, or social constructionist side of the argument, in that it is the perpetrators who define the target group. He thus delves into the collective human psychopathology, whereby the perpetrators see their victims as phantasmic and existential threats, thereby triggering collective self-defense mechanisms. This poses a tricky paradox. On the one hand, victims of genocide almost always tend to be defenseless. On the other hand, the perpetrators see the victims as existential threats. So how can this be? Does this argument risk blaming the victims? Okay, and that's pretty much it. You have your usual weekly assignments. Your extended deadline for the prospectus is coming up shortly, and then we have your historiographical essay due at the end of the semester. Further instructions are forthcoming. Anyways, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.